Hello and welcome to FunBikes TV. My name is James and today we're going to do an assembly video on the new 1500 watt MXR bike. The first thing we're going to do is to remove the handlebars from where they're attached to the front forks and then attach them to the handlebar clamp. For this you will need 2 handlebar clamps and the 4 bolts that came in your bag of various parts within the box in the bike. Carefully cut the cable ties and remove the packaging from the handlebars. You'll see on the handlebars there are grooves lines on them which indicate where they need to sit within the forks, within the clamps. When you've attached the bars, make sure that the uprise in the bars is in the same angle as the fork legs themselves. This puts the bars at the correct angle for riding. Take your handlebar clamp and apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads. Attach the clamps with the bolts. Check you've got the bars at the correct angle before you tighten them. Once you're happy with the angle, tighten the clamps up, ensuring that the gap is equal at the front and the rear of the clamp. At the same time, while we've got the 6 Allen key in our hand, we're going to make sure that the yokes are tight on the bike as well. We're now ready to move on to fitting the front number board and mudguard. We're now ready to fit the front number board. To start off with, we'll need to remove the protective cover from over the top of the sticker. Then taking the white plastic bracket and the 2 self-tapping screws that came in the same bag as the handlebar clamps, we're going to attach the clamp over the front brake hose. You'll need a Phillips crosshead screwdriver to do this. Put one side in loosely first and put the clamp over the hose and attach the opposite side and tighten up the first self-tapping screw that you put in loosely. Then let's just drop down for a moment. We're then going to remove the bolts for attaching the number board to the vehicle. So 2 bolts just here at the top using a 5 Allen key. Remove those. At the same time, using the 5 Allen key, make sure that the 2 bolts that hold the bracket in place are tight. We're now going to attach the front number board itself, routing the cables around on each side of the bracket, placing it over the top and then bolting it back down into position. We've now attached the front number board and we're ready to attach the front mudguard. We're now going to attach the front mudguard to the vehicle. On the bottom of the number board there's 2 holes in it which line up with the 2 tabs coming up off the front mudguard. Hook those into position and then move the mudguard back. Using the 3 bolts that are in the nut and bolt, align them with the mounting points in the bottom of the frame. Once you have all 3 in, tighten them up fully. We are now ready to fit the front wheel and front brake caliper to the vehicle. So we're now going to fit the front axle and wheel to the vehicle. Take the front axle nut off and remove the 2 spacers. These were on the bike when you removed it from the cage. You will see there's a very slight difference in the length of the 2 spacers. The longer spacer goes on the brake disc side. Place your axle through with your shorter spacer. And twist it out slightly to allow you to get the longer spacer on. Apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the thread and then attach the nut. You will need a 14 and 17 spanner and socket combination to tighten this up. Make sure the wheel spins freely and you haven't over tightened it when you tighten the wheel up. It need to make sure there is no side-to-side play, but at the same time the wheel spins. We're now going to make sure that everything is tight on the front wheel and attach the brake caliper itself. To start off with, using a 12 spanner, make sure that the nut holding the valve in place is tight. If this is not tight, it can cause the valve to rip, the tube to move around within the wheel, causing the valve to rip off. Then using a 5 Allen key, make sure your 4 brake disc bolts are tight. Using an 8 spanner or socket, make sure that the caliper mounting bracket is tight. We now need to remove the bolt from the caliper at the back and slide the caliper over the disc. Sometimes if you've caught the front brake lever without the caliper over the disc, as I have done, you will need to remove the caliper and then just push the pads apart carefully using a flat blade screwdriver. Just pop it between the pads carefully and space them back out, pushing the pistons in. Be gentle when you do this because you don't want to damage the actual pad itself. And slide the caliper over the disc. Our front brake caliper is now attached, the disc's tight and the valve is tight on the bike. We are now ready to move on to the rear of the vehicle. On both sides of the bike, make sure that the foot pegs are tight, using a 5 and 10 Allen key. Then using a 14 and 17 socket, check that the rear swing arm is tight. Once you've attached, check the rear swing arm is tight and applied a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the thread, you will find there are some protective covers that came in the bag of nuts and bolts. Push these into position on both sides. We're now going to make sure that the stand is tight on the vehicle using a 14 and 17 spanner. And apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads. We're now ready to fit the rear shock cover and rear shock to the vehicle. We're now going to fit the rear shock absorber and shock absorber cover. This came in the bag of various nuts and bolts. To start off with, using a 12 and 14 spanner combination, make sure the rear shock bolt is tight on the bike. Apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the thread. And taking the cover, remove the shock bolt from the bottom of the shock and place it through the shock cover, like so. Then using a 5 Allen key, remove the 2 seat mounting bolts at the top. Place the bolts through the covers and reattach them to the seat. We're then going to lift the rear suspension up on the bike and slot the bolt through. Applying a small quantity of stud lock to the threads and then tightening using a 12 and 14 spanner or socket combination. We've now attached the rear shock and shock cover, so we're ready to move on to the rear wheel, making sure the brake caliper, sprocket and discs are tight. We're now going to make sure that the rear brake caliper and disc are tight on the vehicle and check that the rear axle is tight. Using a 14 and 17 spanner or socket combination, check that the rear wheel is tight on the vehicle and apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads. Then using the 5 Allen key, check that the rear brake caliper is tight and the rear disc bolts are tight. We're now ready to move on to the opposite side of the vehicle, making sure that the sprocket is tight. We're now going to make sure that the rear sprocket is tight. Using a 10 spanner or socket, check each individual sprocket mounting bolt. At the same time, make sure that the rear valve is tight on the bike, again using a 12 spanner as with the front. And then we're just going to check the chain guard and bits are tight on the vehicle for using a 4 and 5 Allen key. These bolts were the 4s and this one here, for your motor mounting, is a 5. We're now going to level off the levers on the bike, insert the fuse and fit the bar pad. We're now going to set the levers to the correct angle. If you imagine riding the bike, it's obviously not very comfortable to have your hands out totally flat to reach the brake levers. So using the 5 Allen key, loosen off the lever on one side and angle it down approximately 30 degrees. And then retighten the lever. And repeat on the opposite side. Looking across the handlebars to make sure that you've got the 2 levers set at the same angle. Once you've done this, we can then fit the bar pad cover. This again came in the box of parts with the vehicle. We're now ready to fit the fuse and put the bike on charge for the first time. We're now going to fit the fuse into the vehicle. This came in the bag of nuts and bolts along with the keys and the spare fuse. In the red holder on the right hand side of the bike, put the fuse in. When you do put it in, it will make a popping and sparking noise. You are completing the circuit, there's no way to avoid this. And then push the fuse in firmly. And replace the cover on the fuse holder. Then take your keys, place them in the ignition barrel, just turn the bike on to make sure that everything is lighting up on your handlebars. We're now ready to charge the bike. Whenever you charge your bike, always make sure the bike is off and the keys are removed. We're now going to put the bike on charge for the first time. The charger is located on the left hand side of the bike behind the fake tank scoop. Pull the plastic cover off and insert the charger. You'll see there's a little notch out of the charger and that lines up with a notch within the charge point itself to allow you to plug it in. When you charge the bike for the first time, leave it on charge for 10 hours. Even if your charger turns to green on the LED, this isn't plugged into the mains at the moment, but when it's green it means the bike is charged, when it's red it means the bike is charging. But for your initial charge, leave it on charge for 10 hours. It will boost up the battery pack on the vehicle. You will get further for each ride and your batteries will last you longer in the long run as well. We've now fully assembled our 1500 watt MXR. Thank you for watching FunBikes TV. My name's been James. Let the fun begin.